pretty wild. Yeah. Well, it's 9 o'clock. I want to be respectful of your all time. My name is Brian Laney, and I work with Epic Brokers. And I'm happy to see you guys here. Excited to go through. I'm passionate about experience mods. So if I get too excited, tell me, hey, slow down. This is interesting. It's fun to me. It's kind of like algebra. If you guys like math in school, some of it just kind of makes sense and it flows. And so I'll help you demystify and see how this works. And you'll be able to go back to your company and take a look at your own experience mod worksheet and help make sense of it. And you'll be able to show others what the help means and be able to predict things ahead of time and keep yourself out of harm's way and a lot of other things. So with me today are two special guests, which are just awesome. Velda is one of our secret weapons at Epic. She is a senior claims advocate, and she manages the claims, specifically only workers' comp claims. We have two different departments for our clients, but in a proactive way, tells our clients what they can do and what they can't do. Basically, when to grin and bear it. We're just doing a quick intro here. So why don't you introduce yourself, and I'll go around the room and everyone can quickly introduce ourselves. And
sure. I'm Velda Sorrentino, and I am VP Workers' Comp Claims at Epic. I work with Brian and the other producers on accounts, which is yours, to help drive your workers' comp claims post-injury down. Naturally, the best claim is one that has never occurred from a safety standpoint, but when it does happen is when I kick into mode. So my background is I've been in workers' comp for more years than I would like to say, almost 40 years. And I have worn all the hats. I used to be an adjuster, I was a supervisor, I was a claims manager, BP. I've worked for insurance carriers as well as TPAs in the capacity. So I know what adjusters are supposed to do to move those claims. So I work with at Epic, having that knowledge, making sure that the insurance companies and adjusters handling your injured workers' claims are doing what they can to mitigate costs, to get the person back to work, to get the doctors to wrap it up, and to finalize the claim. And I know that every dollar spent is going to go into what Brian is explaining today, your X mod. So we want those dollars as low as we can get.
And there's some things that employers can do, and there's some things that they just can't do. And so Velda's great because when you have an angry business owner who calls, I'm just pointing it to Virginia because she's a business owner, and she's not angry yet.
I'm angry.
But if somebody gets injured and they're milking the system, there's abuse and there's fraud, right? And so when it's that abuse and they're just milking the system, Velda's the person that can, that our clients call. They just say, okay, well, here's what you can do. Here's the the tools that you can use, and this is what you just can't do. There's nothing you can do. So anyway, Virginia.
Well, I'm Virginia, and I am half owner of Onsite Health and Safety, which is a first aid provider. Some of you may know us already. We respond to workplaces when people get hurt, and that is a case, and we deal with it as a case, hopefully, so that it never actually becomes a claim. I'm a paramedic, and I became a safety professional by accident. Lots of safety people become safety people by accident. But I love taking care of workers. I love that employer-employee relationship. And it was amazing when I met Velda. First of all, we both are V's, but it was listening to her talk and the reasons behind her doing what she does with the return to work. It's the same concept that we use applying the first aid program pre-claim. So I'm pretty excited that we're on the same page. It took a long time for we could get first aid and the safety on the same page, the insurance, and work together to do it.
Hey guys, and so my clients for the last 20 years since graduating college have all been construction, and then I have a couple lumberyards. So in trust, you guys are a little different than some of the others because you have a couple different regulations. You have the general employer regs and you have the construction regs. So But today we're talking about just calorie or the experience mod. So, okay. Who is familiar with experience mod worksheets? Does anyone here have any background or understand how these things work? All right, well, you guys are all going to be experts by the time. We're going to go through a couple things. The worksheets. We're going to go through what a primary threshold is. It's something they created in 2017, and it's that threshold where a workers' comp claim stops affecting your XMO. And it's different for every employer. So I can tell you for the largest employer, it's $75,000. That's the max. For the smallest, it's 4,500. So that's the weight part of California XMOD or EMR system, right? So every employer, they take a look at your claims and they count the first part of it, only that primary threshold, right? And so every employer has a different primary threshold, and it's listed on your XMOD worksheet. So I printed the 3 examples that are in my presentation here. So as we're looking through here, you can look down and look at it printed in paper. But each worksheet has a primary threshold, and each worksheet has a loss-free rating. So if you look at that printed example I gave you, the primary threshold is up here on the top right. And you'll see it with the whole page on it. And the loss-free rating, the next thing on there is down here, kind of on the bottom left. We'll talk about what those things are because you're going to really like them. They're going to be what you're going to want to go towards. We're going to talk about subrogated claim credits. A subrogated claim is one where we're just talking workers' comp today, but a subrogated workers' comp claim is one where your workers' comp carrier is going to be collecting money from someone else. When does that happen? So let's say one of your employees is in a car and gets rear-ended. It's always going to be a workers' comp claim on your workers' comp. And then your workers' comp carrier is going to try to collect money from Geico or Progressive or whoever the Yahoo was that hit your guy. Right? That's a subrogated claim. And so you can get credits. If it's a subrogated claim, you can get that claim discounted on your XMOD worksheet. Sometimes those claims are big. And so if you're going to be, if the insurance company is getting money from someone else, you want to get credit for that, right? You at least want that to be discounted. And then the last couple of things I'm going to be talking about are what happens if you've got payroll missing from your worksheet. And I know someone who's had that happen before, and it can be tens of thousands of dollars of premium. Really easy to find. It's a pretty cool thing to find. So after that, Virginia is going to talk about injury management practices and first aid. That's her expertise. And then following that, Velda is going to talk about return to work and light duty and how to get all the tools at your disposal to kick the abuse and fraud and people milking the system off your books. If that makes any sense. That's helpful. And if anybody has any questions, please stop. Please pause. So who issues EMRs? Every state has a different bureau. There are 36 NCCI states, and there are like 13 or 14 non-NCCI states, and California doesn't use NCCI. We have something called the WCIRB. Who thinks the WCIRB is like a sister radio station to the WKRP? Does anyone remember WKRP in Cincinnati?
TV show.
Yeah. So the WCIRB is the Workers' Comp Rating Bureau, Workers' Comp Insurance Rating Bureau here in California. Okay, and they publish and calculate all EMRs for every California employer. They also calculate and publish all EMRs for employers doing work in California. So if you're a Nevada contractor, and then you come into California, you start doing work. As soon as you have a California resident doing work, it's going to get reported, and they're going to find out about it. And as soon as you cross that threshold of $10,400 of expected losses, and I'll talk about what expected losses are, then they'll publish an EMR or an experience mod, same thing. EMRs, XMOD, same thing. Many employers, I have many clients that have several different EMRs because they have work in several different states. So I've got a client who does work in Colorado, California, and Oregon. They got 3 different EMRs. 2 of them are issued by the NCCI, and 1 of them is issued by the WCIRB. So that's how it works. And so if you have work in several states, you'll have several different XMODs. And you can have a really good XMOD in one state and a really crappy XMOD in another state, and you can have really expensive workers' comp in one place and normal costs in another. It's really common. But, it's all based on your loss experience and how your claims experiences in that state or where the heck you are. So this presentation will be available to you, and there's a bunch of links that I included, so you can click on these things if you want to see and actually look at the different things. But how do EMRs work, and why is it important? Your experience mod is basically a calculation where they calculate your actual losses and they compare them to what they expect your losses to be, they being the bureau, the state, right? It's a merit rating system where they're benchmarking employers with their peers. So if you're an electrical contractor like Alan, they're looking only at electrical contractors when they're looking at your losses. And if you're a heating and air contractor, they're comparing your losses with other heating and air. How do they do that? Well, through class codes and through the payroll that the employers have to report their payroll. And so I'll go through the worksheet in a sec, but they really are evaluating companies on their peers, and they're evaluating the claims of those types of companies with their peers. So if you were a glass company, they're comparing you with other glass companies, and then the claims of glass companies with your claims. And then based on how much payroll you have, they come up with this expected losses. And so if your losses are worse than the expected losses, your XMOD sucks, right? If you beat the bet, you've got a credit mod and you're paying a lot less than the other people. That kind of makes sense. I'm overgeneralizing. I'm trying to make it simple. So the audited payroll from each workers' comp year is what they use. And the reason I say this, audited payroll, oftentimes the audited payroll, the updated number doesn't get sent to the bureau. And if you beat the projections, right, you certainly want all that credit, because I'll go through it. But if you have unreported payroll, it will inflate your XMOD. Missing payroll will inflate your XMOD dramatically. So I'll go through that. Happens all the time. I find errors all the time. So I'll show you how to look for it, tell you what to look for. We already kind of talked about the primary threshold, but it's a range that the Bureau looks at each claim. Depending on the size of the employer, they only calculate the first piece of it, and it's either $5,000 or $75,000. And I'll go through how they come up with it. It's kind of weird. And EMRs over 1.25 can get you disqualified from projects. That's very common. It'll also get you on the naughty list, and Cal OSHA inspects 1/3 of their inspections come from the naughty list. And that's people who have an experience mod north of 1.2. I call it the naughty list, but it's their, I forget exactly what they call it. It's the list of people who have experience mods that exceed 1.2. The formula was unchanged up until 2017. Nothing anybody ever wants to memorize, but the left side is what it used to be. They simplified it, making it what it is on the right side. It's still pretty complicated. They added something called a primary threshold in 2017. Still does the same thing, but it's just different. Really, really strange. You have to dig in here and really understand algebra to try to calculate one of these things yourself. But you can if it's simple and you don't have that much payroll, you don't have that many claims. The worksheet is just basically like an Excel spreadsheet. So they use a experience period of 3 years. And that experience period for every EMR is this 3-year period ending 21 months ago. 21 months before your workers' comp renewal. 21 months before your anniversary rating date. So this 3-year period they look at, these are months. So like a January 1st renewal for 2023, be January, February, March, April, that's what this is, right? And so if you just count back 21 months, that's the end of the 3-year period, if that makes any sense. So any workers' comp policies that start in this period get calculated into the EMR. And the reason they get really specific with this, didn't think, well, I only have 3, you know, if it's this 2019, 2020, 2021, it can't be that hard. Sometimes you have OSIPs and CSIPs, sometimes you have acquisitions, you might have sister companies, you know, Virginia might want to try to buy another health and safety company, and suddenly they've got a really crappy X mod, or, you know, and then hers would be averaged with theirs. That happens. You might think of, you know, acquiring, you know, a company and it could tank your X mod. I've got a lot of clients that have multiple entities. And so I'm detailing how those 2 or 3 entities affect the overall X mod. So I've got some companies where one entity is running smooth and the other one has a lot of claims and losses, and they at least can take a look and see, okay, well, how does that X mod come into play? Really common. So does anyone have any questions about the experience period, that 3-year period ending 21 months before the renewal date?
What if you are new? So for example, we were bought in August of 22. So there wasn't 3 years for the prior. Would they be looking at the prior owners?
Good question. Good. If you're a brand new startup, chuck in a truck, right? And this is a construction association, but if you were a brand new car dealership, right? You had no employees, no lot, no cars, no equipment, no tools. They assign an experience mod of 1.0 for the first 3 years, and your average 1.0. Anything times 1.0 comes out with the same number, right? We're all working at this EMR as a multiplier, right? A bad X mod would be 1.5, or anything over 1.0, right? Well, to start out, they give you 1.0. DNQ, do not qualify. That's what they call it. So if you look it up online, type in the employer, if they don't have an X mod, it just says DNQ, and it's multiplied. 1.0 is what's used for that. Yeah. If it's an acquisition, if somebody buys an entity and it's a running entity and it has employees, equipment, and a location that meets the requirement that the Bureau uses, and you'll assume that X mod unless you can somehow meet, you know, get out of it. And it's really difficult to get out of it. Even if you just, so if someone buys your company, they're gonna be pretty much buying your experience mod unless you can put up a fight to, you know, get out of it. But if it's a completely new entity, it gets diluted with the other entity, and the loss experience would just be averaged with the other entity. It's generally how it works. It boils down to the employees, the location, and the tools and equipment and the operations. They've got these different things, and the state has been trying to fight people trying to dissolve a company and let somebody else start operations up and to get away from an X mod. And so they've got a really aggressive way to fight and to try to, you know, people who have bad X mods try to get away from it. So unsuccessfully. There are some ways to do it, but there's law firms that help. Anyway. How do the EMRs impact your final workers' comp costs? Well, I copied and pasted 4 examples of real workers' comp quotes from clients of mine. So you can kind of see exactly what the effects are. A little hard to read, but an EMR of 1.5 would surcharge a $100,000 premium. Let's say your workers' comp cost was 100 grand, and you had a 1.5 X mod. It's going to cost you $50,000. No joke. The same contractor, if they had an EMR of 0.5, they'd be paying half. The swing is that much. So these are some real quotes for renewal quotes. So this is a plumbing and heating and air. They've got like $7 million in payroll. Their experience mod is 0.91. That saved them $28,000. This guy's 0.68, saved them $77,000. These are real numbers, these real premiums. This is actually where it adds up. That's the total. I mean, this is the numbers that really show up on a renewal quote. This is a unfavorable experience mod. So the starting premium on this contractor It's a plumbing and electrical with $1.3 million in payroll. The starting premium was $43,000. The surcharge, 95 grand. Pretty wild. There were some other credits and stuff that got the premium down, but it's like a receipt, you know, like a tally. That's how the X ones work. Anybody have any questions about the factor, that how that works? Has anyone ever seen one of these things? Has seen a quote or seen an X mod on a renewal quote? Sometimes if you don't have a broker who's in front of it, and you don't even, and they're not babysitting the X mod to tell you, it could be a surprise at a renewal. I mean, it could be you could have a favorable X mod one year of 0.68, and it could be 1.68 the next year.
Yeah.
And a heads up is what you're looking for. If you're budgeting, sometimes you're bidding projects that might be a year ahead of time. When do you want to know your workers' comp costs potentially double? You know? That's why this stuff's important. Okay. The worksheet. All right. So we've got 3 cool examples. I don't know what that little design is. That kind of worries me. I didn't draw that, but we'll see what other kind of cool designs are on the presentation here. But this is the worksheet. And it's in order. There's 3 worksheets that are on this presentation here, and I printed them so you can look down at this kind of blurry-ish copy. But these are real clients of mine, and I just created a name up on the top so you don't have to worry about me sharing client files or anything like that. But the actual loss information, this stuff is real. Every XMOD worksheet looks the same from California. These are California worksheets. The left side is your payroll, and the right side are your claims. I use this example for the first one, just because it's simple. Up here on the left, each of the workers' comp class codes are listed. Okay. Can you see that on your example there? So 5140 is electrical, I think. 5187 is plumbing. There's sales, clerical. And so this particular contractor, there's 3 years showing on this thing. He had $234,000 in the electrical class and payroll from 21 to 22. That makes sense to that. You'd want to compare it to your final audit, make sure that that matches, right? But this worksheet is created and published each year, showing each of your classes, the payroll, and there is an expected loss rate that the Bureau comes up with assigned to each class code. So they multiply the payroll times an expected loss rate, and they come up with expected loss. So for every $1,000 of payroll, there's this expected loss rate for clerical of 9 cents. And so for the $45,000 in payroll in this example, it's going to generate $41 of expected losses. Does that kind of make sense? And so they add up the expected losses for each of the 3 years of that experience period that we were talking about a couple minutes ago. They add up with based on your own payroll and their own made up expected loss rates. The state of California comes up with expected losses based on the size of your company. That kind of makes sense? And so then they compare these expected losses with your actual losses. And if you look at the right side of each worksheet, right, that's where they calculate your claims for each year. So this is the same corresponding year for 2021. This guy had no claims. Good year. For 2020, there were 3 claims. You see this? They're listed here. And then he had none for 2019. That makes sense? And so they're comparing the actual losses to the expected losses using that worksheet, okay? And I'll go through in a little bit more detail.
Is that just the year that the claim started? Or if you have a claim that goes from 1 year to the next continues, is it gonna be in both years?
Any claim that occurs on any of these policy years is going to be showing on this worksheet, okay? So these are the claims showing that happened on the 2020 to 2021 year.
Mhm.
2 of them are closed. This guy's still open, $175,000. So the year this was created, You know, this was from January of 23. So this is a claim from, this is a 3-year-old claim that's still open. For someone is, getting paid. When they need someone like a Velda, they call the adjuster. And she'll talk about what's going on? How come, why is it still open? What are the stats? That's the kind of stuff. But these will plague you. And so I'll talk about in another slide in a couple of minutes. There is a point on every one of these claims where they stop hurting you on your X-Mark. And that's what this is. Primary threshold. They only count the first portion. I'll talk about that on another slide. But at some point, they don't harm you anymore. They've gotten so big where you can stop sweating it, right? Don't you kind of want to know when you can stop sweating that? I do. My mind works that way.
I was gonna say, I kind of liken it to my auto insurance. If I have an accident, that accident is going to cost me for the next 3 years. How they quote our auto insurance.
Yeah.
It's, so what happened 2 years ago is still going to impact what they charged me for 3 years. And then it rolls off.
Eventually it goes away.
And that's what these do. Those claims will follow you for 3 years. And then it'll roll off and the new ones will come up.
And they give it a year to season or develop
Yeah.
before it counts against you.
That's why when he showed that other one, that those first 2 years didn't count. Those 3 years were bulked back. It's because we consider the newer claims green, meaning they're still treating, we don't know what the permanent disability will be, we don't know, so those are too green to throw in to calculate your premiums. They want them to mature.
That's
Or
the standard.
close.
That's how all the bureaus work that way, whether you're in California or the NCCI. So, so we talked about expected losses, right? It's the payroll times an expected loss rate, right? Gets your expected losses. Now, the first red flag I want to give you guys is on this page right here. If you see nice round numbers on the payroll side, there's a problem. How often do you have nice zeros at the end of the year on payroll? Have you ever had it on? Never, right? But when would you have nice round zeros? It would be on when you're projecting something, right? And so at the beginning of the year, when you're working on a workers' comp renewal, right, you're projecting how much payroll you're gonna have. I think I'm gonna have $4 million in clerical. I think I'm gonna have $4 million in heating and air, right? And that's how the policy is issued. It's usually a round number. The audit is how they clean it up and they find out, okay, here's where the final numbers ended. Well, often companies will project one number and end up more than what they have. Very common. You project $1 million in payroll and they have a great year and they end up with $3 million in payroll. Right? Really common that the insurance companies don't send the updated payroll numbers to the bureau. And so if the numbers don't get sent with the bigger number, right, they're using the smaller payroll figures to come up with what? Your expected loss rate. Less payroll gets you a lower expected loss rate. They're comparing your actual losses to that expected loss rate, if that makes sense. So you want credit for every dime of payroll you've got. Any missing payroll jacks your experience mod up a lot. And so oftentimes the final audited payroll is higher than the projected payroll that the insurance company issued the policy on. Does that make sense? So you just want to make sure, going back and double check. Do these numbers even match? Are these right? It's really easy. This thing gets issued once a year. Double check it. There's one document you want to double check, the final audit. If it doesn't match, there's a process. You just call BS on the whole thing and you say, I want to dispute it, and it gets corrected. That's how it works. You can correct an experience mod with an error 3 years back. I've done it and got people tons of money back finding an error. So if you think that you might have errors because of one thing or another, reach out. I'll let you know whether you have an error or not, whether it's going to be a credit or not. Here's another funny design. How funny. I wonder where that came from. We talked about the expected loss rate. Now, the state has something called a D ratio. That's unique to California. And they calculate expected losses by a D ratio, another little formula, algebra, to come up with something called expected primary. We don't need to go too far in the weeds, but that's how they weight expected primary, the primary portion of a loss, and then they come up with an expected excess portion. And the expected excess, if you look at the blue and you look at the red up there, the red is the expected excess, and that's the two portions of a claim. There's a primary and an excess. That's how they come up with these things. The reason they do that is it helps them determine something called a primary threshold. Okay, and the primary threshold, the expected losses drive the primary threshold. The higher your expected losses on a scale, the higher your expected losses, the higher your primary threshold. The primary threshold is listed on every one of these things, like on this guy, 15 grand, right? And that's the portion of the claim, of an actual claim that counts against you, okay? Anything over 15 grand is ignored. They don't even look at it. So if you want to look at it the other way, on this guy, he's a small employer. Every claim is calculated within the first $15,000. A $15,000 workers' comp claim is not a big workers' comp. So that's a.
But Brian, don't they still charge us? So maybe the 15,000 only counts towards our X mod, but all those other amounts go towards our actual premium.
Totally.
We're still paying it.
Yeah. But they're only counting the first 15. So why is the primary threshold so important? Well,
So,
if you think of a small employer, the whole claim is being counted by just that primary portion. So a $15,000 claim for this guy, or on this one, 9,500 in this example, 9,500 bucks. A fatality is counted the same as a $9,500 injury.
I was gonna say, so in theory, you would want your primary threshold to be a low number. Because any dollars over that is not counted against you in this.
In theory, yes. Yeah. But the problem is, if you think of it that way, if a small primary threshold, let's say a $9,500 primary threshold, two broken arms would count against you the same as two fatalities. Two broken arms would bounce your X mod from a 1.0 to a 2.5. It's disproportionately against the smaller employer. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? That's where the disproportionate is. The smaller employer can have one injury that might be $9,500, and it's going to take their experience mod rating, the EMR, and it's going to take it from 1.0 to 2.0. Whereas a larger employer, let's say you were a Tykert, right? I just said they have thousands of employees. Their primary threshold must be $75,000, right? A $9,500 broken arm to them, it's not even going to move the needle 1%. I know that. I'm not speaking specifically on Tykert, but I have clients where I have a cabinet shop where I've seen the experience mod portion of their premium. Remember that one example I was showing you that can cost you $90,000? I've seen the workers' comp X mod premium part higher. The insurance company's collecting more money for that than the total of the claims that were paid out.
Right.
So the penalties can exceed the claims. No joke, it's crazy. So the primary threshold is just that primary part. Once it exceeds that, the claims don't count against you anymore. So in this example of $9,500, there was a $175,000 claim. If you look to the side, only $9,250 are counted. And the reason they don't count the whole 9,500 is the state subtracts $250 for first aid. They assume every injury has first aid, so they subtract it by $250. Really strange. As
That
part of
was
their formula.
nod to small employers. I listened to the WCI, I sat there. That was how they were gonna fix things for small employers. $250. Yeah, if they're not,
It's crazy. It really is crazy. It's that funny design. It's so strange. So all these totals go down to the bottom. And they're just 3 years. And so all the payrolls get added up down here. You know, or, I'm sorry, down in this little bucket right here. Big primary losses, primary expected, and then actual primary. Right? Actual primary is just the primary threshold portion of each one. The first, 9,500 each claim. Right? And that gets added down here. And this is like a subtotal of each worksheet. And then they just take the pieces of these and plug them into the final math. And so if you look right here, the final math is just 15,843 plus this over 27. Actual primary plus expected excess divided by expected excess. That gives you your EMR. And that's really what this is at the very bottom. It really isn't that hard of a algebra. And they put it on here for you. But the most important thing to do in it is just to double check the payroll for each classification. Make sure that you're getting credit for each classification and the payroll associated with it. And then double checking the claims to make sure that the claims are on here right. And that you don't have a claim from some similarly named employer. Let's say you're Sac Valley Electric, not to pick on you, Alan. But what if there was Sacramento Electric?
we would accidentally send them a bill.
I have clients that have locations and they have like a franchise. They get claims for the wrong thing all the time. All the time. So
That happened to us as well. We remember
yeah,
3 or 4 years ago.
this is a really important
Huge
document
chunk
to
of-
audit every year. Highly important document to audit every year. It has a huge impact on the final cost of your workers' comp. And subrogated claims, we talked about that for a second. What is this design? I've got an 8-year-old. I've got an 8-year-old at home, so the only thing I could think of is that he was like playing around with my laptop, so I'm glad it wasn't worse. A subrogated claim. We talked about that just briefly, but let's say you have an employee that is involved in a claim that is caused by somebody else. There was a fight at your job site. There was a car accident where your employee got rear-ended. Your employee was on a forklift and got hit by a car. I had a claim like that. When they're going to go after the other insurance company, it's a subrogation, and so you'll get credit. You have to know that there's a subrogated, right? If you know that you've got a claim that's going to be subrogated, right, and you tell the insurance company, hey, this is going to be subrogated, will you make sure that you note that on the claim? What they do is they send that to the WCIRB in the form of a unit stat report. And then what happens is the WCIRB, when they calculate your X mod, next to this particular claim, it'll have an S. So if you have subrogated claims, you want to look at your worksheet to make sure you got the credit for it. It's either there or not. If it ain't, there's a problem, and you have 90 days to get it fixed before your renewal. I mean, these things get issued 90 days before your workers' comp renewal. The difference of a subrogated claim in premium dollars for the average client that I've worked with is in the form of tens of thousands of dollars in premium. This is a factor. One claim can be tens of thousands of dollars in premium. Nuts. One claim, one little tiny thing. Alan, can you attest to that?
Yep.
It's nuts. So subrogated claims are the devil, but they can help you. And then we talked about the round numbers being a red flag. Round numbers here are a red flag. If you don't have numbers that have, all the way through, it's a good indication it's a projected number, not an audited number. So OSIPs and CSIPs. Does anyone here do work in RAPs, OSIPs and CSIPs? Okay. They count that payroll as well. And it often gets screwed up. Often gets screwed up. What I find is a multi-year project that's OSIP. Year one, they'll be planning and a little bit of clerical. Year two, there'll be a whole bunch of payroll. Well, they'll get the year one right, and they just won't even put year two or year three on there. And so for me, I look at these worksheets for my clients, because I'm crazy like that, and I'll call people and go, hey, what did you do that you had a project where you only had $9,000 in payroll? Why did you have $2,000 in payroll on a project? We don't do projects where we have 2,000, well, that's for the time. So look for little tiny reports of payroll. That wouldn't be at a car dealership. OSIPs and CSIPs are like when they have a project-specific insurance policy, really common at condo projects or schools or something like that, where the project has its own insurance policy, but the project policy includes workers' comp. You definitely want credit for that payroll, because remember, missing payroll does what? Inflates your mod. So that's a really common thing. And we talked about which policies, so
One question for you, Brian, on that form. Gives you a number beside the word insurer on here,
yeah,
which relates to a specific job. How can you tell what they are?
you have to call them.
Yeah.
The bureaus, the WCRB is really, you call them and they're funded, man. They've got people who answer the phone. It's the most, I've never been more impressed with an entity, a state agency or an entity than the WCRB. When you call, they're very helpful and they'll tell you exactly what it is. But those correspond to a workers' comp policy. And then you can chase it down to find out if it's a school that you worked on or a, subdivision. It might have its own insurance policy, but that's how you chase it down. So, OSIPs and CSIPs, which ones are included in your experience period? Any policy that incepts or begins within the 3-year period, right? And so this is your experience period right here. Remember this diagram? And so your 3 normal workers' comp policies might be 1, 2, and 3, right? And then what else gets counted? Well, in addition to the normal workers' comp policies 1, 2, and 3, it would be any wrap. And so as an example, here is a 12-month wrap. It started 5/1, so it started in here. Here's an 18-month that started this one. So again here. So you can have 3 or 4 or 10 workers' comp policies all running concurrently at the same time. They're all in your experience period that all get calculated into your experience mod worksheet. It's not uncommon that an X mod worksheet has, I've got some clients that have 5 or 6 pages because they have all the different OSIPs and CSIPs on. So, any questions on that? Math or
You said the payroll goes in, the OSIP and CSIP payroll goes into your period. Do those claims that they have
bingo. Mhm.
go into it as well?
Yeah. Mhm. They don't miss the claims, but they miss the payroll all the time. The claims get reported all the time, and they don't skip a beat with that. But if the insurance company pays out money,
Yeah.
they are
keep
sending
track of that.
notification to the bureau. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Ready?
Virginia,
Okay.
Virginia's gonna talk about injury management practices.
Brian, I really appreciate that.
The
As an
X1.
employer, that whole thing that you just did.
Oh.
Nobody explains it good.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stand here so I can do the thing, just like,
There's a clicker too.
oh, there is, I love that. Thank you.
Right there.
Okay, is here good? Okay. I do have a little bit of data, but I don't spend that much time because my head is a little jumbled. Anyway, like I said, I'm Virginia from Onsite Health and Safety. Onsite runs a response service to workplaces, lots of car dealerships, lots of construction. Our primary market is construction, but also restaurants and anyone who employs anyone really benefits from what I think is a robust first aid program. So we started out saying the best claim is the one that's prevented in the first place, right? So we have pre-claim and post-claim. And you need to be paying attention and doing your due diligence to save lots of money, whether it's pre-claim or post-claim. But of course, I think if they never become claims in the first place, they don't hit your X mod. That's the best way to save money. It's also, in my world, the best way to take really good care of your employees. Because employees, each of those claims, all of those dollars represent a person who had a lot of stuff done to them. And so in my world, I've been at it a long time. Maybe not 40 years, but 30. And I have a lot of opinions, a lot of numbers. Onsite runs a lot of cases, a lot of injuries. I think just this month, A couple days ago, we went over 1,000 for the month. So thousands of injuries, and so I have these opinions. And so it's perfectly okay to argue with me, but I have data. And I will bring up that data. No, I love hearing feedback, differences of opinion, different ways of looking at things, because that stimulates discussion. And frankly, 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a first aid responder. Insurance people hung up on me, didn't even answer the phone when I called with the idea. So Brian, speaking of time, be sure and let me know when I'm 5 minutes out, so I don't step on Bella's time. I don't believe anybody else's data. Maybe Brian's. I don't believe what I read in the CDC. I don't believe what I read anywhere, because I know what people do to data, but I believe my own because I have firsthand knowledge of lacerations and back pain and shoulder pain and what actually happens after thousands and thousands. So I'm going to make some statements, and I hope it changes your facial expression. I hope you go, you know, let's talk about that. We are going to have a Q&A after. You can save the big questions for Q&A after, but if you have a comment, please, you know, say so, and I'll stand by my stuff. And if we have time, I have some case studies, and I think the case studies are a lot of fun. I'll show you some pictures anyway of what I'm talking about when we talk about what we're actually, our cases that are not becoming claims. But if we have time, we'll actually do some case studies, and I think they're fun. And if you want them, you can take them and do them with your people when you're practicing with your people about how they can address events in the first place, so they never become claims, so they never are a threat to your ex-mod. But if you want them, just ask me, or we'll come and show them. We do that for no charge, because I really believe in this mission. You know, as far as teaching people how to take care of each other. For the sake of understanding, there are differences between these two words, right? Reportable and reportable. We safety people, I'm a certified safety professional at CHST, that's construction safety lady. I live in reportable. You know, we live in the 300 log. We fight, right? Who's the safety person? You are. We fight to keep things out of that 300 log. But that's different than reportable. Reportable is what happens when those cases become claims. And then, like Brian said, they're different in every state and really outside my pay grade. Those would go over to someone like Velda if they become reportable. What Onsite does, and where I live, is in the OSHA. We're governed by the OSHA language. And sometimes it's like different. What OSHA says about a thing and what the insurance people say about a thing is different. And what OSHA says about a thing is the same in every state, but reportable is different in every state. So you need to have both sides of the equation, both areas of expertise, in order to do the best job. I think is taking care of your employees and, of course, your ex-mod. Again, ask me questions about reportable. Ask Velda and Brian cases about them. All right, every case is not a claim. And the terms get used interchangeably. Sometimes when I'm talking to insurance folks and they talk about an injury and they just automatically call it a claim, you know, my skin starts crawling, because 90% of them don't need to be claims. They might be cases. It's still an outie. Person still claimed and reported something, but that doesn't automatically mean it has to be a claim. And if it's never a claim, it doesn't affect your money. So it becomes kind of a no-brainer. You know, let's take care of as many people as we can as cases, and correct your insurance folks. They just automatically start calling something. Say, wait a minute, this is still a case. This is still a case, but does it have to become? Understand that? All right. Now, we're going to get into what it looks like at the workplace. You know, the mechanic who cut his finger working on a car, you know, or got a piece of something in their eye. It's amazing how I used to think construction was its own. Everybody was going to be different. It's really not. Foreign bodies in the eyes, lacerations, sore backs, sore shoulders, twisted ankles. You could twist your ankle in the freezer at a fast food restaurant, or you could twist your ankle on a construction site. People need to report. And we safety people think, well, everybody's reporting everything because I told them so, and I know. Okay, they're not. They're not reporting everything, because every person has a different threshold inside of them as to what they think is bad enough to report. Does that make sense? When you get my age, you reported that something hurt, you'd have a claim every day. And so, you know, and young people, you know, they just have the perception that something hurts. So you claim every day. So everybody has that threshold. Does it hurt bad enough? Is it maybe an injury? Do I need to report it? In the current healthcare climate, folks, things have changed. People are not the same as they used to be. Some people, oh yeah, they want to go to the doctor and tell them how to take care of everything, but not so much anymore. So in my experience, in my opinion, just anecdotal perhaps, but the threshold has gone up. Folks are saying, yeah, I'll take care of it. They don't want to listen so much because they don't trust. They trust either these doctors or these, but you can't trust both. So what we found is that sometimes us going out there and helping take care of a person gives us the ability to say, you know, that's clearly been a broken finger. You know, you really want to get, you know, medical care for that. In my view, the more we can do in the field, whether it becomes a claim or not, it gives us that much more control, and control is good. Agreed?
And knowledge. And you know,
Well,
you know whether it's.
if you improve reporting, you have more opportunity. If you improve reporting, people aren't just going home and taking care of their own foreign body. You know, you need to work on your goggles under the car. You need, you know, your guys are not wearing their face protection when they're cutting and grinding because they're getting foreign bodies in their eyes. If they are comfortable with reporting, you're going to know about it and be able to put more things in place to prevent it, right? And of course, we don't want people deciding when they get home or having their wife deciding when they get home that they're going to the ER because they should get seen for that. And people do, right? Am I right? People, they don't say anything at work or they say something and all they have is the option to go to the doctor. And so they go home and where do they end up? In the ER. Yes, Brian.
Can I pause for 1 second?
Yes, you can.
The employee has the right to be seen at
Anywhere.
the ER at any time,
Yeah.
so if you show up at the ER, one of your employees shows up at the ER at 2 o'clock in the morning, they claim they got a piece of metal in their eye. The ER can't even confirm your employment at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're gonna treat you and they're gonna send a bill to the lumber yard or the contractor or whoever the heck it is.
It's bad.
Yeah,
It's
no
bad.
joke.
The costs, the psychological component, the treatment afterward. We don't want people in the ER for any reason. Workers' comp is just part of the whole thing. If you don't need to be in the ER, that is not a place to be. So let's get these people comfortable reporting. Let's respond, take good care of them, make sure they've been addressed so they don't decide to run off to the ER. And you know, we still have people who say, well, I just go to the ER. I send my folks to the ER. And that makes my skin crawl more than insurance people calling every case of claim. It just is not good. It's not good for our ex-mon. It's not good for our people. It's not good for our country and our medical system. So let's do what we need to do as responsible employers to not have that happen. And by the way, we'll save a lot of money. Honestly, that's kind of where I live. And by the way, we'll save a lot of money. Let's do what's in our employees' best interest. Oh, and by the way, we might save millions. Oh, and by the way, we might qualify for a job that we wouldn't have qualified for. And now we're going to have people employed that wouldn't have been employed by us, at least, because we weren't worrying about their best interest. Our ex-mod went up too high, our premiums went up too high, and we lost that bid. Make sense? What is in the employee's best interest? This is where Velda and I were like finishing each other's sentences. You know, we keep them at work in the first place. She gets them back to work if they happen to leave, all for the same reason. It's in the best interest of your employees and your company. Oh, and by the way, you save a ton of money. And saving a ton of money, there's no crime in that. Let me tell you, profit is good and honoring. So a lot of times, you guys, the insurance company, insurance, workers' comp will approve things. Just because they approve that doesn't make it good for people. I spend a lot of time Onsite's injury program is not governed medically. So we don't put doctors over that injury program by design, so that we can be governed under the OSHA regulations. We can't prescribe. It's not expected. We're governed completely differently than, you know, that $250 credit. That's the medical folks. They govern differently, and I don't speak for them. But we have other services such as silica physicals in the field or asbestos physicals. Those all have to be governed by doctors. So I spend a lot of time with a lot of doctors, and they're the first ones to tell you, The insurance approves it, doesn't make it good. And really, we've got a whole sort of almost quiet uprising going on out there in the medical world where doctors are saying enough already. I don't want to do all this stuff to people. I don't want to be obligated to prescribe drugs. And it's still happening. I mean, is Oxy good for anyone ever? Argue with me, I dare you. Cheaters. I mean, and still, we had a guy, not even a month ago, that I got very emotionally involved with. This guy hurt his knee, might have broken the kneecap or something. You know, you don't die from a broken kneecap. It heals. But he ended up in the ER, home for 2 weeks, with a brace to not move it, with 30 days worth of Oxy. And you know what happens? The Oxy starts to wear off. You need the pain to justify the drug, and you need the drug to solve the pain, but you need the pain. The pain never goes away. I'm telling you, it is so bad for so many reasons. It's a whole nother topic of why opiates are so contraindicated for acute injuries. And gosh darn it, you take care of that guy at the job site. That's what the onsite techs do. We all sit around and talk about people who never got their first opiate. That's how we get up every day, because we took care of that guy with the back pain. He didn't get the drugs. But you know what? Those drugs are approved under workers' comp. That doctor can prescribe them all day long and get paid. And I'm telling you, it's not good for people. And I'll argue that. Put me in a room full of as many doctors as you want, and the anger level is going to go higher and higher and higher. Because really, they know better. Questionable surgeries, approval wait times. These are all bad for our people. And what do they do to our ex-mod? Very bad things. They do very bad things to our workers' comp, but worse, in my opinion, is what they do to our people. And then those people become prey to who? The predators. Who are the predators?
Commercials on TV with the attorneys.
The attorneys.
Uh,
They call themselves plaintiffs' attorneys. I call themselves predatory attorneys. I call them, and they are. I mean, maybe there's a good one I've never met. I have a few friends who are attorneys, but they don't have their pictures up on billboards. We are in a terrible time in our country, and our workers are the ones being preyed upon by these people. Sure, they're extorting money from us, all with these crazy promises to this poor guy. That guy I told you about that went home with the Oxy and the brace and waited 2 weeks for his follow-up. Sure as you know what, he got picked up by one of those attorneys. And so let's protect our people. Let's protect our people from those attorneys. Let's protect our companies from those attorneys by showing up and taking really good care of our folks in the first place. And that's pre-claim, and that's first aid. Yes? Amen? Okay.
Amen.
Amen. This is what I'm talking about, not life-threatening stuff. And no matter what kind of company you have, construction, car dealers, any of you really want to train your folks over and over and over as to what to do when something happens. Again, we provide it for free. If you ask us to come out, I know Epic has lots of programs we can give you. All of us can give you resources, but train them. What is life-threatening? You don't, electricians are soft sometimes. And it would really help me. In fact, that guy I'm talking about was an electrician.
Yeah, we're called the criminals.
Well, I call you the guys that sit on the top step of the ladder, but that I don't. But training, they're smart. So train them, train them over and over. This is life-threatening. For this, you need to be in the ER. This is not. This is what's in your best interest for these sorts of cases. And it really does help. It really does help turn things around. Heat illness. Oh my goodness. Do we have an impact on heat illness? If a person that says they're overheated goes to the doctor's office, what do they get? How do they get that water? Not through their mouth. They get IVs. That's what they get. And an IV is not going to hurt you. I mean, I used to give myself IVs in the ambulance because I hate them. I'm serious. But you go in for heat illness, you get an IV. What's an IV? It's a claim, and it's also a thing. It's an event in a person's life when they had to go to the doctor and they had to get that IV. And what I'm telling you is they did not have to get that IV. If they're awake and alert and they didn't need to be in the ER, we just can do the best job taking care of them at the job site, in the field. No psychological impact, no claim. And I think it's really important that we as a California employer do that. Back to it. This is where a legitimate first aid program, and we're not the only one in the country, I don't think. I mean, there's not a whole lot like us because the bottom line is it's not super profitable. But it is profitable because what am I going to take, you know? It matters. It really does. But again, any robust first aid program lives if they're not medical. It can't be medical, can't be a nurse because a nurse is licensed differently. A paramedic, I'm a paramedic, you know, paramedics are nobody when you're not working on the ambulance. And maybe my first thought was a little bit, nobody, let's find out who I am, you know. But seriously, legally, a paramedic or a military medic, they're not governed the same way as a nurse or a PA or a doctor. This is where we live. And under this OSHA rule, this is every company in the country is required to give employees a reasonable method to report their injuries. And I say, in my experience, a reasonable method to report injuries does not include an automatic trip to the doctor's office. That becomes a disincentive. And we're not allowed to have disincentives. We're supposed to encourage people to report. But if the only response we have is the doctor's office, there's your built-in disincentive. You guys agree? See what I
Couldn't agree
mean?
more. Yeah.
So let's give them an incentive to report, which is, hey, we can do some really great stuff for you before you have to, if they want to go to the doctor, they go to the doctor. One thing about technicians, yours, mine, whoever's that live in this rule, when we're done providing the first aid, they're explicitly offered medical care to either accept or decline. And so no one can ever say that you didn't have them comfortable to report, you didn't offer them medical care, which they do say that. But for the ones that truly are fraud, honestly, in my book, most of them don't start out truly as fraud. They start out scared. They start out with fear, uncomfortable circumstances, and they exaggerate their symptoms and turn themselves into victims because it's hard to report. I really believe that.
Or they get contacted by an attorney.
Or they go.
And the attorney shows them how to do it.
Well,
I'm sorry to be so cynical, but.
oh,
it's kind of
Brian,
like-
have you and I ever drank together? We need to, because, oh my God, next AGC, St. Louis. Anyway, I think that by giving people that other option, we make them comfortable. And of course, if they never leave the job site, then the predators don't ever see them. So that's how we comply with this rule, by giving them that non-medical. You guys see what I mean? You still like me? So I said I had data, I wasn't lying. It's kind of neat, actually. Any of you safety folks, HR folks, ever want this stuff, charts and stuff to show your people when you're doing your training, training your people on how to calculate your XBOT and what to do about it is pretty healthy. People kind of like it. Our numbers are lower. So that, see that 89%, those are people who declined medical care. So these are people to whom we went out and and provided first aid care, listened to them, talked to them, nice in your uniform, paying attention, writing a report. And then they explicitly declined medical care. Nobody can say that you didn't offer it because it's been offered and they've signed yes or no. If we take fast food out of this, we have a really big fast food, well, all restaurants. We have, what, 2,500 restaurants that we respond for? Those French fries, French fry grease, it's kind of just like welding, you know, burns a burn. They have a lower success rate than construction and car dealerships. So they're like, what, 80% they would think? So they're 80. That bothers me because that brings all the numbers down. Construction is more like 92% overall. So if you're sending more than 8% of your people in and more than 8% are becoming claims, then you need to look again. Because this will save you so much money. It's not, right? 8% in construction. I don't know exclusively what car dealers are, but I would say 10%. Any more than 10% of your people going in, that's too many.
You're saying 1 out of 10 of the people who you find out had some sort of complaint of an incident, an injury, a complaint of pain, you heard about something happening.
Yep.
1 out of 10 should evolve to a
claim.
claim that goes to the insurance
goes to the
company,
Right.
to an emergency room or a doctor.
Right. 9 out of 10
9 out of 10 can be
can be
handled
handled in the field.
with an ibuprofen or a Tylenol.
Ibuprofen, TLC, massage gun, Stair strip, the whole thing. I'll show you some pictures. So here's how it works. Your people are all trained. They know what life-threatening means. They know when they need to call an ambulance, right? It's required in construction. You have to have a suitable number of people. And it's a darn good idea everywhere. If it's non-life threatening, it's a fingertip, it's an ankle, it's one of the things that I listed. Don't need an ambulance. You locate them in a safe, calm place. You can initiate your basic first aid. With a service like ours, you call us, we get dispatched. But in the meantime, you get on telehealth with somebody to help initiate the first aid, help calm, help make the decision. That's all part of the whole response. Then we get there, provide the first aid, explicitly offer the medical care, and 90% will decline, and no claim and no recordable will result. And people feel really well taken care of. Make sense? So, were you thinking about what about x-rays? I put this up there. It's a whole nother thing. I'm not going to go super far into x-rays. But just because you're taking care of folks in the field and using just first aid, that doesn't mean that they can't get an x-ray if they need or deserve one. It's a whole nother program. And, you know, if anybody has questions, you can ask me. But a negative x-ray, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, a negative x-ray does not have to become a claim because it's still first aid. We will report the fact that we did the x-ray because in California you have to, but it doesn't mean that you have to file it as a claim as long as that x-ray is negative because it stays under that first aid guide. Am I right?
Well, I can't imagine what the trigger would be to require you to turn a not broken hand in.
Well, we just have to make sure the doctor's first report is filled out in California. It's not that way in every state. In California, once a physician is, because you have to have a physician to order the x-ray, right? So we kind of transition, that's a partner company. We transition, your first aid provider transitions at that point to being a supportive administrative support. But when a doctor has to get involved and order the x-ray and review the x-ray with the worker, you have to fill out that 50/20. They do it, we don't do it. We don't have the authority or the ability to fill out doctor's first reports, but all medical people in the state do. But if the x-ray is negative, they turn it right back to you, give it back to you. And then you look to your insurance people as to who you send that to and what you say about it. That's above my pay grade. So options for workplace first aid, people like us, and we set the bar. I mean, I can say that nationwide, we set. There's people out there bragging because they're keeping 40% of your cases. Goody for you. No. I say, that's nice. We do set the bar, but we're not the only way to get this cat done because not everybody loves them. That's fine. I don't know who they are, but lots of times, like we were talking about OSIPs or CSIPs or RAPs. So on those large construction projects, there will be an assigned medic, somebody in the first aid station. I don't rarely see those at car dealerships, but lots of construction sites have them. And they will provide the first aid right there on the site. Although sometimes some of these guys, well, I'm going to put a nurse on my site. No, I don't say that. But it's kind of counterproductive, see, because that nurse is governed medically, and there's your 50/20 every time he or she touches. If that person is a paramedic or a military medic, well, they're governed under the OSHA regulation, it becomes a very different thing. But that is a place where you might more often, if you never heard of a first aid response service, might see medics. Lots of companies are putting out triage lines. There's some physicians in certain states that are quite helpful. You know what I mean? Helpful. They do one thing and write down another. And I take great issue with that because that's cheating. And they shouldn't be cheating. Perhaps instead they should be getting on the bandwagon to help, you know, reform the problems with the system. But lots of companies use what I call favorable documenting decisions by their physicians. And I'm not all about that. And then there's telemed. There's telemed, lots of companies using telemed. The keywords are med or health. Health is an OSHA thing. It's not a claim. Med, you need in the state of California to have your. Everybody get that? You ready for, got 5 minutes? Perfect timing. You ready for some photos? I use lacerations, you guys, because lacerations are visual. You can actually see the healing process. But the same concept that applies to the lacerations applies to sore, this, that, twisted, this, that. It's all the same. The body heals. And so lacerations are visual. And so here you go. These are very old pictures. These were mine in the field. Really, this started way back in the refinery where guys didn't want to miss their overtime. So, let me just put Boomy up. Are you kidding me? So we started steri stripping people. Do you think that those need stitches? When you look at them? I mean, I did. I thought, really? Well, okay. And I started steri stripping people and having the opportunity to learn how well the body heals when you're not introducing extra stuff. On a medical side, those cases that I just showed you, they get stitches. This is a claim. Those cases become claims because they get injectable anesthetic, they get stitches, they get drugs, they get light duty, and so on. They become claims. On the first aid side, we don't have the option to do all those things. So we use ice, which instead of delaying the healing process, actually jumpstarts the healing process. We use steri strips, which are not recordable, not claims, and not invasive. And so it's the same injury treated under different standards of care. And what's the result? No claim, no recordable, and faster healing. Far faster healing, far less opportunity for infection. And guess what? Antibiotics do not prevent infection. Argue with me, I dare you. After seeing how many thousands of cases where antibiotics are prescribed, and then you think, well, that's why I didn't get infected because I took the antibiotic. Well, we realized 5,000 cases later, nobody got infected. Well, maybe we didn't need all those antibiotics. So far, so good. I'm almost done.